Good morning, everybody. So this will serve as a recording and a review of the lecture notes that we've looked at for Unit 2. Today we look into the sand roads or the Trans-Saharan trade route, which, as you can see by the essential question there, is just kind of raising up the issue or the wondering how exactly do the Trans-Saharan trade routes really link together and create positives and negative kind of consequences for trade amongst Afro-Eurasia. So again, of course, we're looking at this major trade system, and this was really the first system that we looked at in this second unit. When we consider Afro-Eurasian trade, one of the largest things that we want to think about is the region itself. And of course, the Sahara Desert is largely what most would recognize as Northern Africa because it is, of course, in Northern Africa. But it is also important to see that it is considerably connected to the Mediterranean trade system. You have a lot of Greek, you have a lot of Italian, um, Carthaginian, which is Northern Africa itself, Byzantine trade connections happening here, and a lot of the history, even before what we started looking at, a lot of the history in this area really influenced trade relations through the Sahara Desert. And so, as you can see, some of the key items that were moved through this whole Mediterranean area of trade were, again, glass, books, wine, anything coming out of Asia, of course, too. It's all going to be hyper connected into this area, what many, again, will call Mediterranean trade. So, in a way, sometimes you can see the Trans Saharan trade route often referenced as Mediterranean trade just because of its proximity to the Mediterranean Sea. The other key thing that we want to look at here, something we did discover in Unit 1, of course, the movement and exchange of gold and salt is very common through this region as it was working towards Western Europe. Sorry, scratch Europe, put in Africa there. Western Africa, like Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, you're going to see those critical items also being exchanged through the Sahara Desert. Of course, it's extremely dangerous. There's a ton of very serious hurdles to cross as a traveler would working through any desert or any long journey. But it was extremely rewarding, and some of these items were highly valued in this area and, again, through Afro-Eurasia in general. Of course, one of the biggest things that we have to appreciate is the size of the desert. And one way to, of course, kind of get around the size of this desert was transportation itself. Therefore, the key mode of transportation through such an expansive desert, especially in the sandier portions, was the use of the camel. And so we have to appreciate that Arabian camels, which will be heavily used from what is today the Middle East or Southwest Asia into the Sahara Desert, camels were really well suited and well built for this trade and economic connectivity through Afro-Eurasia. They are animals that are very well suited for carrying heavy burdens and heavy loads along with lots of people. And camels were also seen as a major contributor for the expansion of Islam into this region of northern and western Africa. Largely, again, we're sort of arguing that if you were to make a considerable comparison, horses were the vessel for transporting Mongols and their influence in Asia. Camels are the vessel that will help expand the cultural influences of Islam into, again, northern Africa and western Africa. We watched a brief film that just sort of outlined how the dangers of traveling through the trans-Saharan trade system were really evident. And it even mentions the concepts of Ibn Battuta, who will, in his journeys through his kind of world travels, expand the Islamic understandings and sort of reflect on the social practices of Muslims in Africa as he continues to explore the world. As far as the specific trade routes go, again, you can see here in the map that there are many. There are many different systems or pathways that are used. Some would, of course, be inaccessible for a period of time due to desert storms or changes to the terrain, which is very common since the Sahara Desert does expand and contract. The biggest thing that we looked at here, again, is that you're looking at massive caravans of travelers on camelback moving their goods back and forth across the Trans-Saharan trade route. All right. We look into the exchange of massive amounts of ivory, gold. We look into, again, the movement of people and slaves through this trade system. And as this whole network is happening, many of these items will continue and go even into sub-Saharan Africa, which again you can sort of see here the exchange of Eurasian goods moving into Africa. So the expansion of horses, you're going to see the movements of silk, the fruits, which are date. Those are more kind of Mediterranean fruits, but they will exchange down into sub-Saharan Africa. And again, the big key one here is salt, just because of its preservative practices and uses for meat, which means survival. So largely what we see here is this desert is now being overcome by people. People are still able to survive in it, even though it's very challenging. And this is now a global network for the exchange of goods and ideas. One of the biggest things we hit on in this lecture also was getting under the practices of the bureaucratic systems of African empires. And we discussed that very heavily in West Africa. We start to see, very similar to China, a bureaucratic system forming. There would be a department that was keen on taking tax revenue as traders would try to come into West Saharan or Western African trade empires like Mali or Songhai, taking those taxes from the traders and then using the money to largely fund projects inside the city, growing military influence, or even using that money to continue to expand the empire itself. So I do want you to see that there is a common bridge here between the Chinese bureaucratic system and the African bureaucratic system. And what this eventually will do is really put many of these West African empires into a large influence over the entire region of Western Africa and Saharan Africa. As far as information goes, something that we did look at a lot in Unit 1, we discussed the importance that Mali had as an intellectual center. This again is largely connected to Mansa Musa, who used an extravagant amount of wealth and gold to build mosques, which of course help Islam expand. We look at Mansa Musa's growth of academic centers to help people learn how to read and write so they could access the Quran and learn from it and become even more devout Muslims. And even just basic scientific schools. So largely you see Mali as this booming center, especially in the city of Timbuktu, as a critical player. The money that comes into this area is also coming from, of course, Trans-Saharan traders. It's not just Mansa Musa who is going to build everything and pay for it. The cities themselves will use the gold coming in from those tax revenues to make cities like Timbuktu as powerful and as, really dominant in intellectual promise as they had, right? Remember though, from Unit 1, we discussed that there is a caveat to this. Even though Islam is very practiced in this area, it is syncretized with local, tribal, animistic practices that are common across the African countryside. And this is where we reflected that Ibn Battuta, sort of in his writings, his Rila, was sharing just the fact that, these are not, in what the Islamic world would say, true Muslims, because they have blended their faith with African faiths. And so the customs are different and they are varied from region to region. So please make sure that we see that even though Islam is a very promising, very expanded religious practice here, it's not in the Islamic world seen as true Islam. We finished this lecture up by looking into the impact of slavery across the trans-Saharan trade routes, especially into Western Africa and Eastern Africa. And we had discussed that in the beginning, women typically were the ones chosen for forced servitude, especially had they been widowed and had lost their husbands. We discussed that, typically in many areas of Africa, they are matriarchies, meaning that women have the key power. But a woman who had lost her husband would now be kind of seen as, unfortunately up for the taking and would have been pushed into slavery. But this will change as many Southwest Asian traders started to realize that males were more suited for the arduous task of mining gold and salt. And so many of those males will be taken into slavery over roughly about 5,000 a year, and they will be forced into servitude going from Western to Eastern to even Southern Africa, right? The critical thing to understand here is that this is not the only time that we will see slavery happening in this area. And unfortunately, we will have a lot more to look at as we go. But in essence, that is it for the Trans-Saharan trade route review of the notes. Again, if you have any questions, please reach out and let me know. I'm happy to help in any way I can. Thank you. Have a good day.